My name is Miss Jemiah, and I will be reading over a period of time Captain Underpants and the Attack of the Talking Toilets. Captain Underpants and the Attack of the Talking Toilets, another epic novel by Dav Pilkey. Hello. Before you read this book, there are some things you should know. So Harold and I have created this informative pamphlet to fill you in on the details. Please don't let this comic fall into the wrong hands. The Top Secret Truth About Captain Underpants by George Beard and Harold Hutchins, who denied everything. Once upon a time, there were two cool kids named George and Harold. They made their own comics about a superhero named Captain Underpants. Everybody thought their comics were funny, except for their mean old principal, Mr. Krupp. One time, Mr. Krupp was being mean to George and Harold, so they bought the 3D Hypno Ring. They hypnotized Mr. Krupp, then they turned him into Captain Underpants. But Mr. Krupp thought he really was Captain Underpants. He jumped out the window to fight crime. George and Harold tried to stop him, but they had to save the world first. When they got back to school, George poured water on Captain Underpants' head. He turned back into Mr. Krupp, but something was wrong. Because now, for some strange reason, every time Mr. Krupp hears somebody snap their fingers, he turns back into Captain Underpants. So whatever you do, please don't snap your fingers around Mr. Krupp. Please, please, please don't snap those fingers. This has been a public service announcement from George and Harold, who still deny everything. Chapter 1, George and Harold. This is George Beard and Harold Hutchins. George is the kid on the left with the tie and the flat top. Harold is the one on the right with the t-shirt and the band haircut. Remember that. Depending on who you ask, you probably hear a lot of different things about George and Harold. Their teacher, Ms. Riddle, might say that George and Harold were disruptive and behaviorally challenged. Their gym teacher, Mr. Meaner, might add that they were in a serious need of a major attitude adjustment. Their principal, Mr. Krupp, would probably have a few more choice words to include, like sneaky and criminally mischievous. And I'll get those boys if it's the last thing well, you get the idea. If you ask their parents, they'd probably tell you that George and Harold were smart and sweet and very good-hearted, even if they were a bit silly at times. I have to agree with their parents. But even so, their silliness did get them into a lot of trouble sometimes. In fact, it once got them into so much trouble that they accidentally almost destroyed the whole planet with an army of evil, vicious talking toilets. But before I can tell you that story, I have to tell you this story. Chapter 2, this story. One fine morning at Jerome Horwitz Elementary School, George and Harold had just left their 4th grade remedial PE class when they saw a big sign in the hallway. It was an announcement for the 2nd annual Invention Convention. George and Harold had fond memories of last year's Invention Convention, but this year's convention was a bit different. The first prize winner got to be principal for the day. Wow, said George. Whoever gets to be principal gets to make up all the rules for the whole day, and everybody in school has to follow those rules. We have got to win first prize this year, exclaimed Harold. Just then, George and Harold's principal, Mr. Krupp, showed up. Aha, he shouted. I bet you two are up to no good. Not really, said George. We were just reading about this year's contest. Yeah, said Mr. Harold. We're going to win first prize in the contest and be principals for the day. Ha, 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 laughed Mr. Crook. Do you honestly think I'd let you two enter this year's contest after that stunt you pulled at last year's invention convention? George and Harold smiled and thought back to the first annual invention convention.